Welcome to segment 3 of lecture 2 in week 2. In the previous segment, we were introduced to the nominal group, to the group as an intermediate unit between the clause and the word, and the nominal group as a sequence of nominal words, determiners, adjectives, nouns, with the possibility of embedded phrases or clauses after the noun serving as a thing, as the head of the nominal group. You're now working up towards the map that I use on the cover slide, the function rank matrix. So on the vertical axis, you have the ranks, clause at one end, word at another. I haven't represented morphemes, making up words here, and then intermediate between the two group phrases. In this segment, we look more at the strands of meaning, the metafunctional strands of meaning, textual, interpersonal, experiential. We'll come to logical later. But let's recap the group, the nominal group. The nominal group is one of the major classes of group in English and many other languages. And as we've already seen, it consists of nominal words. So nominal group is a group of words belonging to the class of nominal words. And the example we ended with in the previous segment, 2.2, was those magnificent men in the flying machines, taken from the eponymous film from the mid-60s. This nominal group then consists of 3 words and 1 phrase that functions as if it were a word in the flying machines. It starts with a determiner, those. This is a specific determiner, and we looked at determiners in exploring the question of why users of English are so fond of the or the or the. Then you have an adjective, magnificent. You remember you can check word classes by looking up the words in dictionaries. And then a noun, men. So 3 nominal words, determiner, adjective, noun, making different contributions to the construction of meaning in the nominal group, in the patterns of wording. And then finally, we have a phrase that serves as if it was a word, the prepositional phrase in the flying machines. And this consists of the preposition in, followed by a nominal group, serves as a complement of the preposition, the flying machines. We can say that this is the anatomy of the nominal group. We've identified the body parts, as it were, the different words and their classes, determiner, adjective, noun, and then the phrase that serves as if it was a word in the flying machines. But what's the nature of the contribution to the construction of meaning in the patterns of wording of the nominal group? Well, to bring this out, we have to complement the view of the anatomy of the clause by a physiological view. So I'm drawing an analogy here with the discussion of the composition of the body. In a physiological view, we'll emphasize the functions that these different parts serve. So we can interpret word class as potential for serving different functions. And the physiological view of the nominal group, of this nominal group, those magnificent men in the flying machines, would specify the functions. What are those? Well, we've referred to some of them already. Those, that's the orienting function, orienting the listener or the reader to the status of the nominal group. Those, meaning I'm pointing this to another reference identifiable to you, and you can identify it in reference to proximity, away from me. That's the deictic. then that's followed by a characterization of the thing represented by the nominal group, magnificent. Then you have the thing itself, men. And then a qualification. What kinds of men? Well, men in their flying machines. So we can now add the physiological view and the anatomical view together. And what we get then is this representation of the structure of the nominal group. Those serving as deictic, a determiner, magnificent, an adjective serving as epithet, men, a noun serving as thing, and then the prepositional phrase serving as if it was a word, qualifier in the flying machines. In turn, so we've seen that the nominal group, like groups in general, consists of words with the possibility of downranking a phrase or a group to serve as if it was a word in the structure of the group. Groups then consist of words, or as I said, downrank group phrases serving as if they were words. Groups in turn, as well as phrases, serve as a component part of clauses. So clauses consist of group phrases. So if we look at the example from this little song in the film, the picture, those magnificent men in the flying machines, they go up, tiddly up, up. So those magnificent men in the flying machines, the nominal group we've already looked at. And then you have they, another nominal group, and go, a verbal group, and up, tiddly up, up, an adverbial group. So this clause consists of one nominal group, those magnificent men in the flying machines. And we've looked at the internal structure of this group. And then another nominal group, they, and we could examine the internal structure of that nominal group as well. The thing, the head of this, is a pronoun. And then a verbal group consisting of a single lexical verb, go. And then an adverbial group, up, tiddly, up, up. If we do the same thing for the clause and put the functional and the class analyses together, the physiological and the anatomical views, what we get is this. Those magnificent men, they go up, tiddly up, up. But the construction of meaning in the clause is a little bit more varied and complex. You could say more powerful than the construction of meaning in the nominal group. So we'll need to separate out different strands of meaning. And there'll be three strands or layers of functions. The first one is theme, rime. The second one, mood, residue, with the internal organization of the mood as subject and finite, and the residue is predicator and adjunct in this case. And the third one, actor, process, place. Now the sequence of class groups is nominal group, verbal group, adverbial groups. You can see that the first nominal group, those magnificent men in the flying machines, serves as theme only. The second one, they go up, tiddly up, up, as subject. But it has, the first nominal group has no function in the layers below it. Now what are those layers? Well, they are in fact precisely strands of meaning. So the functions are differentiated into different kinds of function. The thematic layer or strand, the mood one, and the actor process one. Let's color code this to make it a bit clearer. The first strand is the clause as a message, with an orientation, a starting point, setting up a local context for the clause as a message. The theme, those magnificent men in the flying machines. The second one is a clause as a move in dialogue. In this case, it's a statement, a claim about something, some information. And that's signaled by putting the subject before the finite in English. So those magnificent men in the flying machines, they go up, tiddly up, up, rather than those magnificent men in the flying machines. Do they go up, tiddly up, up? And finally, the clause as a figure, a representation of some quantum of experience, with the process go, one participant in the process actor, and one attendant circumstance, a specification of location in space, the place, tiddly up, up. Where do they go? Now, one way of separating these is by testing the subject, identifying the subject as opposed to the theme. We'll talk about this in much more detail, so this is just a preview of what we'll discuss in much more detail, more systematically later on. And the best way of identifying the subject in English is to check which elements turn up in a question tag, a mood tag. So if we add a question tag or a mood tag, it turns out that this is a mirror image of what I've called the mood element, subject plus finite. So those magnificent men in the flying machines, they go up, tiddly up, up, don't they? This shows very clearly that the element that's picked up in the question tag or the mood tag is they. And that indicates, again, very clearly that they serves as a subject because it's the element that's picked up in the question tag and the mood tag. And the mood element, the combination of subject and finite, has a sequence subject before finite, but in what we can call the mood tag, there is a mirror image of this, finite followed by subject. In fact, the sequence we expect in a yes-no question. Now we can see clearly that those magnificent men in the flying machines is not the subject, because it's not picked up in the question tag, in the mood tag. But it does serve as theme, it does serve as an orientation. And in fact, interestingly, the subject is of course a reference to those magnificent men. So it's as if it's highlighted as the orientation, those magnificent men in the flying machines, and then it's picked up by a pronoun referring back to it, they, as a subject. So we'll see that the combination of subject and finite is very important in English when we look at the clause as a move in dialogue. And as I said, we can identify it, we can recognize it by checking what the question tag or the mood tag would be. So in this clause then, the three strands of meaning, the physiology of the clause involves three different strands of meaning. Clause's message, textual, indicated by yellow. Clause's move, interpersonal, indicated by red. And clause's figure, configuration, experiential, indicated by blue. And we started with the nominal group, those magnificent men in the flying machine, to drill down into the organization of one of the constituent elements of the clause. So its internal structure is that of the nominal group. In this case, it serves as theme. And we could do the same for they and go and tiddly up, up. And of course, don't and they in the mood tag. And if you look at this passage from the song and listen to it, you get a sense of how it works in the construction of the meaning of the song.
Those magnificent men in the flying machine, they go up to the up, they go down to the down.
Yes, sadly they go down, tiddly down, down as well. So the theme of the first clause sets the orientation, sets the local context for the first clause. But then in the reference in the second clause, they go down, tiddly down, down. They serves a theme, but it harks back to the highlighted theme in the first clause. So this is what we've been exploring systematically when we look at clauses and other grammatical units. And unlike traditional grammar, we would start with clauses, because clauses constitute the most extensive environment of the grammar, and they provide a kind of window on, or gateway to, the construction of meaning in text. That's, as I put it before, an ecological approach to the grammar. We look at it in terms of its environment. Now, the clause within the grammar provides the environment for all the other units, the groups, phrases, the words, and even the morphemes. Now, because traditional grammar started with words, it didn't get very far. It didn't take an ecological approach. So it was much harder to get at the sense of the grammar as a resource for constructing meanings as wordings. So to recap, we're moving towards an interpretation of a clause that is not only anatomical but also physiological. And we're separating out the functions of the parts of the clause into three strands. The textual, where we look at the clause as a message, a quantum of information in the flow of information that's constructed as a text or discourse unfolds in its context. And here the key system is a system of theme, the choice of how you organize a message to make it as friendly to readers, to listeners, by providing them with an orientation, with a starting point in their interpretation of the clause. It also consists of an interpersonal layer. This is clause as a move, an interactive move in dialogue, where the speaker takes up a position, a role, and assigns a complementary one to the addressee, the listener. This is a clause as a move, and the key system here is system of mood, the choice as to what speech role the speaker takes on and the complementary role that she or he assigns to the addressee. And then finally, the clause is a representation of experience. Experiential, the experiential function or metafunction. Clause is a figure or configuration of process, one or more participants like actor, and possibly circumstances like place. And this system here, the key system, is a system of transitivity. So as we go through this semester together, we'll be looking at first the textual resources, the clause as a message, then the interpersonal resources, the clause as a move, and finally the experiential resources, the clause as a figure. And after that, we can begin to ask how clauses are combined through logical semantic relations. And that would be a logical function, linking clauses together into chains of clauses or clause complexes. But these three in the internal organization of a clause, textual, interpersonal, experiential, they represent the three metafunctional strands of meaning in the clause. And they are reflected in the function rank matrix that I will be talking about in some more detail shortly. And again, the color coding is useful. So yellow, that stands for textual, the textual strand, red for the interpersonal strand, and blue for the experiential strand. And these are the internal organization of the clause. Then the green strand, the green column here, that's logical. These are the resources for combining clauses and other units into chains or complexes of units. So we'll be talking, as I said before, about the clause as message, system of theme, clause as move, the system of mood, and clause as figure, the system of transitivity. In other words, the clause combines three metafunctional strands of meaning constructed as wordings. And these are simultaneous. So simultaneously, the clause serves the textual metafunction, a message, a quantum of information in the flow of information that structures a text or discourse in its context. Interpersonal metafunction, a move, a quantum of interaction in the exchanges that make up dialogue. And the experiential metafunction, a figure, a quantum of change in our experience of the flow of events. So we'll use this terminology, clauses message, move, and figure. Textual, message, interpersonal, move, experiential, figure. And we can visualize this in the following way. If you look at the clause from above, from the point of view of the semantics, the construction of meaning in the clause, we can see that the clause unifies these three different strands or perspectives: message, move, and figure. So semantically they're separated out, as it were, but the grammar serves to weave these three strands together, unify them, map them onto one another in the structure of the clause. But that's precisely why you need, in the physiology of the clause, you need separate strands for each metafunction. So the meanings in the text as a unit of meaning functioning in context, and the wordings constructed in the grammar, the lexicogrammar, starting with the clause. All three are illustrated in the song We Shall Not Be Moved. You had that in week 1 as a pre-recorded presentation, even though we didn't actually go through it together in our synchronous session. If you take this verse, we shall not be moved, we shall not be moved, 1, and then 2, like a tree that's planted by the water, we shall not be moved. You can see the choices of theme, the orientation of the clause as a message, the point of departure in the listener's interpretation of it. So in 1, you have we. So the orientation is, it's about us, you and me, together as a group. And then in 2, this is displaced by simile. A comparison with us, saying we're like a tree that's planted by the water, so strong and supple. And that then comes in as the orientation to the repetition of the message, like a tree that's planted by the water, we shall not be moved. So this short passage shows that, 1, the choice of what is given the status of theme in the clause as a message is meaningful. It's expressed in English, Chinese, many languages, as initial position in the clause. The choices set up the pattern we, like a tree that's planted by the water, bring out the analogy between we and a strong but supple tree. 2, each choice contrasts with an alternative one. We shall not be moved, contrasts with be moved, we shall not be, or like a tree that's planted by the water, we shall not be moved, contrasts with we shall not be moved, like a tree that's planted by the water. So the fact that there is a choice is inherent in the principle that is meaningful, semantically motivated. 3, in the declarative clause in the passage, the subject we appears to be the default theme, but it can be overridden. An element other than the subject can be given the status of theme, namely the adjunct, like a tree that's planted by the water, which displaces the subject as theme. This is a contrast between unmarked or default theme and marked theme, overriding the default theme for some good reason. Again, this is just a preview, warming you up for our systematic exploration of the clause as a message, the textual organization of the clause resources. And so we can compare and contrast the subject in red with the choice of theme. So in the first 4 clauses, they coincide. We shall not be moved. We shall not be moved. But in the next one, they're separated. The theme is like a tree that's planted by the water, displacing the subject theme, we shall not be moved. And again, you can use a question tag. So we can ask, how can you recognize a subject and how can you recognize a theme? Well, we've already seen how you recognize a subject. The subject you recognize as that element which is picked up by a pronoun in the question tag. and thus functionally given the status of the nub of the argument. We shall not be moved, shall we? No, we shan't we be? And so on. That's how you recognize a subject. It's not the meaning of subject, but it's how you recognize it. In contrast, how do you recognize a theme? Well, the theme you recognize is that element which is put first in the clause. And that means that it's given initial prominence. Like a tree that's planted by the water, we shall not be moved. So this is how you recognize subject and theme from below when you analyze or parse clauses. But they're not defined in this way. The definition, because we're approaching this functionally, we're looking at language as a resource, comes from above. So what about the subject? Well, the subject is that element of the clause as a move in dialogue that is a nub of the argument. And you can see this in, for example, we shall not be moved, shan't we? No, we shan't be. We could be, we won't be. So here you're arguing the nub of the argument is we. In contrast, the theme is that element of the clause's message that sets up the local context for that message, serving as an orientation to it and a guide to the listener's interpretation of the message. That's why we can say it's a starting point, the speaker giving the listener a starting point in her or his interpretation of the message. So they serve complementary functions in the organization of the clause. So reflecting the different characteristics, 1. We can note that while subject may be an experientially potent participant in control of the clause figure, as in police shall not move us, its nature is interpersonal, not experiential. And that's why you can have we shall not be moved by the police. And that's the voice distinction between active, the police shall not move us, and passive, we shall not be moved by the police. So you have a choice. Do you argue about the police? The police should not move us. Shan't they? No, they can't. They shouldn't. They will. And we shall not be moved by the police. Shan't we? We might be. We shouldn't be. We mustn't be. Second, the choice of theme reflects and constructs the method by which the passage of text is developed, message by message. For example, choice of times and historical recounts developed in terms of chronology. We'll see lots of examples of this soon. The elements of subject and theme belong to different strands in the metafunctional structure of the clause, as I've said. Subject, that's the interpersonal strand, the clause as a move in dialogue. Theme, the textual strand, the clause as a message. And then also actor and other participants, like sayer, censor, carrier, the experiential strand, the clause as a figure. And as we've already seen, they derive from the metafunctional spectrum of the grammar. So let's now consider another grammatical dimension, again, because we've already had a preview of it. The compositional hierarchy from the largest to the smallest grammatical units, known as a rank scale. So in the next and final segment of Lecture 2, I will review the grammatical composition, the rank scale of clause, consisting of group phrase, consisting of word, consisting of morpheme. And then we'll intersect this compositional scale or hierarchy we call the rank scale. We will intersect the rank scale and the spectrum of metafunction and create a map or matrix of the systems that together make up the wording potential of the lexigram of a language. So that'll be our next step. Thank you.